On first glance, you'd likely assume that these are open back headphones. They appear to have grills on the back and venting around the sides. They're not open though, they're most definitely a closed back. That might make them a good option for people seeking an isolating headphone to protect them from other people's noise, or maybe to protect them from your noise. That is, unless, like so many other closed back headphones, they struggle to sound natural. I've often lamented the lack of well-tuned, good-sounding closed-back headphones at affordable prices. There have been plenty of closed-back headphones around, but all of them required some fairly significant compromises. You had to buy one and hope to just get used to its sound, or put up with it until you could break out the open backs again. Thankfully, we've seen some excellent budget options lately with the FiiO FT1 and the Atom Audio H200. But what if you want a higher level of sound quality? Could the Aune SR7000s be the answer to your prayers? Or would they be another entry into the close but not quite list of closed-back contenders? On paper, the SR7000s start off strong. At $599 US, they're not horrendously expensive, despite looking and feeling fantastic. They also have some really interesting internal design concepts too, such as a W-shaped ceramic dome dynamic driver. The W shape in the dome and also the ceramic polymer material should produce a driver that's very stiff, very rigid, and that should prevent any breakup or distortion from the driver and therefore deliver a more pure version of the sound waves to your ears. Then there's an independent surround that connects the dome itself to the basket that it sits in or the frame that it sits in, and that's way better than many other dynamic drivers on the market where the dome itself is expected to flex as it moves, but that's going to always produce a level of flex in the driver and therefore distortion in the driver and therefore a less pure sound wave. These might be subtle things, but they're often a factor. The driver itself has a 55 ohm impedance, which is a nice mid-range impedance, not too high, not too low. And when you combine that with a very high sensitivity of 106 decibels per milliwatt, you can drive the SR7000s from literally anything. Before we get too excited though, the problem with most closed-back headphones isn't their drivers. It's the fact that the driver is stuck inside a closed box. A closed box that will create nasty reflections and resonances and just mess up the tonality overall. That's why closed-backs rarely sound as good as their open-back equivalents. But Aune have a potential solution for that too. Inside the cups are some dragon scale style shaped designs that are designed to break up any of those reflections or resonances and prevent them from messing with the sound. We'll talk in a moment about how well that translates to the sound of the SR7000s, but on paper, it's good logic. In fact, everywhere you look on the SR7000s, there are signs of very well considered design. They look and feel fantastic in the hand, and they're really comfortable on the head. The adjustment of the headband is a nice, clicky, ratchet style system, and it holds its place really well once adjusted. It can be a bit fiddly to adjust. You can't really do it on the head because the adjustment is inside the headband here, but that's really my only gripe, and once they're set up, you never need to worry about it again. The SR7000s also come with a nice carry case and some nice cables. They're nothing special, but they're fine. And that means that everything else comes down to how they sound. Before we get to that though, I should mention the sponsor of this video, and that's Deconi Audio. Deconi Audio make replacement earpads, including some that'll fit the SR7000s, I think. But they also make earphone tips, including for true wireless IEMs, headphone carry cases, and even a modular cable system. The modular cable system is particularly great because it means you can have less cables hanging around, getting tangled up with each other, and just generally mucking up your listening space. With the Deconi modular cable system, you buy one end of the cable that fits your amplifier. It could be a 6.3mm or a 4.4mm connection. And then you buy the other end of the cable that suits your headphones. So you just leave this end permanently connected to the headphones, and you leave the other cable permanently connected to your amp and just switch between them as needed. That way you're going to have less clutter around because you've only ever got the one cable connected to your amp and then just these tiny little lengths hanging out of the bottom of your headphones. So you can enjoy less clutter, less mess, and better sound quality too potentially. Even better than that, you can have 10% off any of the products that I've just mentioned. Just visit deconiaudio.com and use the code PassionForSound10 at the checkout. You can use it on any of the products, and you can use it over and over again. Now, let's get back to the sound of the Aune SR7000s. I would describe their sound as just a little bit crisper than neutral. They've been tuned with some extra treble emphasis that's a bit more than what I would call natural, but it's not unenjoyable. One area that it became particularly evident was playing games and watching movies, where the dialogue gets just a little bit extra crispy. Again, it wasn't bad, but you could hear the sense of enhancement up top. Moving to the other end of the spectrum, the Aune SR7000s offer excellent bass extension and a bit of extra emphasis, but it's right down low. As expected for a closed-back headphone, the soundstage is relatively compact, but it doesn't sound congested. Ultimately, I'd say the SR7000s are a good, solid, mid-tier closed-back option. They're probably a touch more natural or neutral, and they're definitely more resolving than a cheaper option like the FiiO FT1, but they're not reaching the levels of something like an SJY Audio Horizon Closed Carbon. And that's thanks to the Horizon Closed Carbons being more spacious and more naturally tuned overall. Given the distinct lack of competition at the price and for closed-back headphones with the SR7000s, I see them as really filling something of a void in that space. They're a very enjoyable, multi-purpose closed-back headphone. They're not perfect, but they're very, very good. They're equally enjoyable for movies, gaming, video calls, and music listening, and they're comfortable enough that you can wear them all day while you do all those things. But I know what some of you are going to be asking. Should you buy the SR7000s over other similarly priced headphones that are open-backed? Are the SR7000s good enough to be considered a good headphone, not just a good closed-back headphone? One similarly priced headphone that I have here is the Sennheiser HD660S2. The 660 can be easier to listen to because of its reduced amount of treble energy. On the other hand, the 660 has noticeably less bass because of its gradual roll-off in the bass all the way from the mid-range down. Because the treble is a little bit better managed on the 660s though, I do think the 660S2 has a slightly more natural overall tonality compared to the SR7000s. The 660s come across slightly more mid-range focused because of the better treble and the slightly rolled off bass, whereas the SR7000s are a bit more of a V-shaped sound. They've got a little bit of spice in the treble and a lovely lift right down in the sub-bass. Surprisingly, when we think about soundstage, the 660S2 doesn't sound super spacious despite being an open back. There's good separation around the sounds, but the overall size of the soundstage isn't huge. That said, they are a little bit less intimate sounding than the SR7000s, and main instrumentals or vocals are a bit further away and a little bit less intimate than what you get from the closed-back SR7000. And so, if you prefer a headphone with slightly sparkly treble and some pretty epic deep bass, the SR7000s are going to be a better choice than the 660S2, regardless of being open back or closed back. But if you want just a little bit more sense of space in the soundstage and a slightly easier listen, the 660S2 will still be the better choice. Want another comparison? Of course you do. If you own the Aune SR7000s, or you're in a position to audition them, play All Night Long by Marion Hill on them and just marvel at their bass. The SR7000s are insanely good down low. However, the percussion on that track can get a touch crispy on the SR7000s. Thankfully, the vocals are still quite present and they're nicely textured and detailed from the SR7000s. If we then swap over to the HiFiMan Ananda Nano though, those do highlight the drawbacks of a closed-back headphone. The overall sense of space in the soundstage is vastly better from the Ananda Nanos. Keeping in mind they're open back, so they've got the advantage there. And in comparison, the SR7000s sound distinctly closed in. Not congested or claustrophobic, but they can't match the spaciousness of the open-back Nanos. However, the Ananda Nanos deliver a very left-right soundstage that's quite flat. That means you're not really getting any sense of depth and layering in the sound, so neither headphone is perfect, and the SR7000s have a little bit more depth than the Ananda Nanos do. As a result, the vocals from the Anandas are just as intimate sounding, as close to you as they are from the SR7000s, possibly more so. And then another point of difference between these two is their treble presentation. I find the Anandas to be a little bit more fatiguing to my ears than the SR7000s. It's interesting because the Anandas are a little bit less peaky in the treble, and they can actually sound more natural up top as a result. But then they're also a touch more fatiguing because they have more treble quantity overall. In other words, the treble peaks are higher from the Anandas, but there's more individual and rapid fluctuations from the SR7000s. And it's those regular fluctuations in the sound from the SR7000s that can leave them sounding just a little bit less natural tonally, whereas the Ananda Nanos get the naturality right, but can be a bit too much in the amount of treble. Something else that plays into this is how loudly you listen to each headphone. So I was trying to listen to these headphones at roughly the same volume, whereas in reality I probably want to listen to the Anandas a bit more quietly because of that extra treble. When you go more quiet, you lose more of the bass, and so it's a constant seesaw of trying to get the right amount of bass without getting into the realm of there being too much treble and it becoming fatiguing. And that's where the SR7000s can do a better job. On that note, the Ananda Nanos cannot match the epic bass that you get from the SR7000s down low. I can't stress how impressive the SR7000s are in that area. And so I think the SR7000s are a really good option for someone seeking a closed back headphone around about their price, about $600 US, but they're actually a really good headphone in general, regardless of whether they're closed or open back. They're not perfect, but no headphone is. I do think they'll benefit from a source chain that takes a little bit of the edge off their treble, so maybe something like a FIO K11R2R or a Denafrips Aries as your DAC, maybe a Musician Draco, which I'll be reviewing very soon, so subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see that one. Or alternatively, you could use a nice tube amp if it's got a slightly smoother treble. That will help the SR7000s too. However, they're really great from pretty much anything I plug them into. They just happen to be even better from some smoother sources for my tastes. And so if that all sounds good to you, I've got links in the description as always to help you go and find a pair for yourself. And speaking of links, don't forget to use Passion for Sound 10 as the code over at DaconiAudio.com so you can claim your 10% discount on any and all of their products as often as you want to. Oh, and by the way, if you are looking for a fantastic amplifier to plug the SR7000s into, or any headphone for that matter, I've got just the option pinned here at the end, so watch that video next. In the meantime though, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.